So we're going to be, I'm sure you've turned there already. I hope you've got your Bibles open in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and reading from verses 7 to 15. So then neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. Now the one planting and the one watering are one in purpose, and each will receive his own reward according to his own labor. For we are God's co-workers, you are God's field, God's building. According to God's grace that was given to me, I have laid a foundation as a skilled master builder, and another builds on it. But each one must be careful how he builds. For no one can lay any other foundation than what has been laid down. That foundation is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on that foundation with gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, each one's work will become obvious, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire. The fire will test the quality of each person's work. If anyone's work that he has built survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, it will be lost, but he will be saved, yet it will be like an escape through fire. Quite an awesome passage that is before us this morning, and before diving into it, we've been in this section of the book of Corinthians for a few weeks, and I want to ask you, what is the big idea of the section of 1 Corinthians that we have been looking at? Sorry? Unity in the church, or the fact that the Corinthians are divided, so Paul's addressing this issue of church unity. The particular angle that Paul comes from is the centrality of Christ and the gospel for producing unity. I wonder if anyone knows what the big idea of 1 Corinthians as a whole is. We touched on this maybe in the introduction. Any idea, what is the letter about as a whole? The purity of the church. Okay, so it's also a letter about God's love for his church, even when that church is flawed. 1 Corinthians is about the church and how good theology should transform our lifestyles. And so Paul goes into some in-depth topics, as we see here, and his aim is that the truth would transform. And that's our aim this morning. So would you bow your heads again as we just commit that to the Lord and pray that his truth would transform. Lord, I thank you that that is the cry of all of our hearts this morning. With the truth of your word that we've read already, may it have its effect in our lives, so that your work continues, Lord, so that your church is purified. We don't claim, Lord, in any means to be a perfect church. We need your word as much as the Corinthians did. So, Lord, Holy Spirit, come as Simon has prayed. Just be with me and the words that I speak, and with these folk as they receive it, in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're going to start with Paul's conclusion of the previous section, which is verse 7. And it's quite a well-known verse, I think. It says, "So then neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth." Last week Luke preached to us, and he concluded that our focus must be on God and not on personalities within the church. Our focus should not be on the Christian minister and his strengths, or perhaps even his weaknesses. If I might take the same liberty as Paul in verse 10 and use myself as an example, why am I preaching this morning? One reason is that God has blessed me with time and, hopefully, certain talents. However, there should be no sense in which this makes me more special or spiritual than anyone else. What is important is that each of us use our time and our talents faithfully for God, which is the focus of this morning's text and message. What have you done with the time and talents that God has given you? In the section from verses 7 through 11, I was drawn to one phrase in particular. In verse 10, we read, "Each one must be careful how he builds." How should we build on the foundation of Christ? From this section, we can draw at least 4 lessons or tests which teach us to build well and ensure that we are building with appropriate care on the foundation of Christ. The 4 tests are the test of unity, the test of humility, the test of honor or glory, and the test of resources. First, the test of unity. Well, of course, we've seen this in the whole section that we're looking at, but we also see it in verse 8, where Paul says specifically, now the one planting and the one watering are one in purpose. As we build on the foundation of Christ, one test for whether we are building well is whether we are building with others or alone. If your work is only worth doing alone in the church, it may not be worth doing at all. This is not to say that we will never work alone. Sometimes the greatest of visions begin with one person, but the test of a truly great vision and purpose will be whether God's people are being continually unified around the person of Christ and the purpose of the gospel. And I think our schools are an excellent example of this kind of vision. The test of unity will always be significant for any Christian's work or church's success. Second, the test of humility. We see this in the tone of the entire passage, and it is explicit in verse 7. Neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. Do we have this appropriate humility, both in relation to ourselves, but in particular, we see this from the Corinthian context, do we have humility in relation to others? Or are we sort of those kind of people who go for Paul or Apollos or Peter? The Corinthian problem was that they were putting their leaders on a pedestal, as though by association with their work, they somehow had something to boast in. Can you imagine how hard it must have been for them to hear that their particular celebrity pastor was nothing? Our temptation in this digital age may not be to elevate local pastors, but it may well be to sideline local pastors in favor of those with international reputations. The words of Paul apply equally to those overseas as to those at home. And to give some examples, remembering that he says that we are not anything. So what about John Piper? John Piper is nothing. What about Beth Moore? Beth Moore is nothing. What about Joel Osteen? Joel Osteen is nothing. And equally for our local context, Doug, Luke, Simon, we are not the focus. We are nothing. And God takes the nothings of this world to defeat the wisdom of this world. We read in chapter 1, verse 28. Friends, are we building with appropriate humility, accepting our identity of insignificance and relying on the Lord for everything? Or are we relying on our pastor, either local or international, to do the building for us? I don't have your time or your talents. I cannot do what you can do. The third test is the test of honor or glory. This test is fairly self-evident, and we see it in the context as Paul highlights God as the ultimate worker, upon whom everything depends, both in verse 7 as well as in verse 9, where we are called God's field and God's building. Fields and buildings have no power or agency to animate themselves. In our case, is the farmer and builder getting the credit for his work, or is it the stalks of wheat and the beautiful architecture that are being praised? Once again, our responsibility is to fulfill the role and calling on our lives and to bear God-honoring fruit as we invest our time and our talents. And finally, the test of resources. Not only should all the honor from our efforts go to the Lord, but we must also recognize Him as the source of provision for all the raw materials for our labor. This test is seen in our passage through Paul's choice of metaphor. First agricultural in verses 7 through 9, and then architectural in verses 9 through 12. I'm going to read that second section as we see Paul move very strongly into this building metaphor for God's work. He says, we are God's co-workers. You are God's field, God's building. According to God's grace that was given to me, I have laid a foundation as a skilled master builder, and another builds on it. But each one must be careful how he builds. For no one can lay any other foundation than what has been laid down. That foundation is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on that foundation with gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, and we continue to then hear what he has to say about that. But it's all about building. There's a foundation, there's a builder, there's foundational work, there's the building that gets erected, and we are that building. So is God the source of all your efforts? Not only in spiritual things, but in everything. One of the most important resources I felt as I was reading this is, what are these kind of resources that we're looking for, that God gives us so that we can continue his work? One of the most important resources is genuine joy in our labors. This is the joy that results from meaning and purpose, the joy of knowing that we are contributing to something greater than ourselves, as well as something of eternal value. Of course, Nehemiah 8 verse 10 immediately comes to mind. The joy of the Lord is your strength. It's so easy to be lulled by the world into a false sense of our own abilities and resources. But when we are doing God's work, we need to be convinced that it depends entirely on him. So let us not be dulled and lulled by the world, but let us pursue the Lord through prayer, time in his word, and with his people, so that the fire of his joy and provision burns brighter and brighter. Realizing that it doesn't depend on you should also alleviate discouragement in the midst of the temporary aspect of our work. We all know that feeling of, does this really count in the end? Does what I'm doing really matter? But if the resources are the Lord's, then we can have faith that we will see fruit in his time. And so, the two questions to ask ourselves in light of this is, what have you done with the time and talents God has given you? And are they passing the tests that we've looked at? Are you depending on God for both the results and the resources as you labor? As we are speaking about resources, let's consider verses 12 through 15. If anyone builds on that foundation with gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, each one's work will become obvious, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire. The fire will test the quality of each person's work. If anyone's work that he has built survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, it will be lost, but he will be saved, yet it will be like an escape through fire. This is a very intriguing section about rewards. The Greek word is literally wages, expanding on the builder metaphor. I've always had significant difficulty with this passage. How can there be degrees of reward in a place that is already infinitely better than anything we can imagine? It has helped me to consider that God is just, both in his rewards as well as in his punishments. In Luke 12:45 through 48, and we're not going to look at all of it now, but Jesus speaks about appropriate degrees of punishment in hell. At the end he says, that servant who knew his master's will but did not do it, rebelled, will receive a severe beating, but the one who did not know will receive a light beating. Even though I don't understand these two passages fully, they do give me great confidence in God as a just judge. It is a comfort to know that God's justice is present in hell as well as in heaven. The rewards will match the work, and the punishment will fit the crime. In our passage, the rewards will be based on the materials used. There are essentially two classes of material described here: 3 worthy materials and 3 unworthy. It is clear that wood is just as unworthy as hay and straw or stubble when the test that must be endured is likened to fire. The 3 unworthy materials will be consumed, while the 3 worthy materials will endure and prove the value of the work. While I believe we all build to some degree with a combination of these materials, the point of the passage is that we can labor to no avail, and this should distress us. We have spoken about the joy that comes from knowing that we are working with a purpose, but how about the despondency of knowing that the work we are doing might be meaningless? In light of this, we ought to continually be assessing the way in which we are using our time and talents for our Lord. Continuous assessment. What is it that determines the materials that we are using and the value of our work? Based on the context, we should make use of the 4 tests as a starting point for assessing our building materials. So we've already discussed those, but those tests will help us to know what is the quality of the materials that I'm using. And second, we should remember that God is more concerned with how we work than with what we do. As Psalm 84:10 says, I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. Paul in our passage is not teaching that pastors will receive a greater reward than lay people. It is also not necessarily true that our secular work is that which will be consumed, whilst our so-called spiritual work will endure. God cares about how we work in all aspects of our life, and He alone knows the heart attitude with which we undertake those labors. And that's also a scary thought. God knows exactly how we work, and He knows our hearts. In conclusion, verses 14 and 15 give both good and bad news to all the laborers. The good news is that we are saved on Christ's merits and not on the quality of our work. The bad news is that we might waste our life and our opportunity to extend God's kingdom. The Corinthians give us a good example of what it looks like to build with the wrong materials, the wrong motives, in particular through a lack of concern for and unity amongst one another. Immediately after this passage, Paul goes on to address that issue in particular and just how serious it is. Their problems were rooted in self-centeredness that was resulting in disunity. They were still going to church, doing the things at church, but their hearts were not in the right place, and they were going nowhere in respect of heavenly rewards. I hope their example will continue to be a warning to us. And as we continue in this series, let us pray that the theology of this book would continue to transform our lifestyles. And let these 2 questions sit with you this week. I hope you'll take them into your quiet time tomorrow. What are you doing, or what have you done with the time and talents God has given you? And what is He calling you to do with your time and your talents? And are you depending on God for both the results and the resources as you labor? We're going to close with a reading from, we're going to close the sermon with a reading from Matthew 6 and then with a song. And it's a passage that comes to mind for obvious reasons, but in verses 19 to 21 we read, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Lord, you've given us much to think on this morning, and I know that this message is as much for me as for anyone. I pray for everyone hearing this message that they would take the time to test their work against what matters to you, Lord. You're the one who tests our hearts, and I pray, Lord, that you would teach us to work with the right materials day by day, so that what we do would endure and matter in eternity, because we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.